She had no tears left to cry. Her body was broken, her clothes torn, her skin marked with bruises and cuts. But the deepest wound was not on her flesh. It was in her heart. Mara Quinn was only 24 years old. Yet in a single night, she had lost every piece of faith she ever had in her family. Her own brother-in-law, Caleb, had promised her work in a nearby town, a job that would bring money to help her and her sister Eliza survive the hard winter. But it was a lie, a filthy trap. Caleb had not led her to honest work. He had sold her like cattle to a trafficker named Silas Crow. And worst of all, Eliza had believed every word her husband said. She did not question. She did not defend Mara. She turned her back and left her sister to a monster. Dragged away in the night, Mara had been beaten, bound, and forced into a wagon. Every bone in her body screamed with pain. Feet. Her knees scraped raw from when she had leapt from the wagon in a desperate escape. Her shoulder torn when she hit the ground. Blood oozed from her hip, but still she ran because the fire of betrayal burned hotter than the fire of pain. Hours later, she stumbled into the wide-open plain. The dry grass cut her feet as she staggered barefoot, each step heavier than the last. The sun was merciless, beating down on her torn white shirt that clung to her skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her vision blurred, and then she saw him. A figure on horseback coming toward her ranch gates. Her broken mind screamed only one thought. The man was here to claim her. Another buyer. Another devil in human skin. Mara collapsed to the ground. The last of her strength gone. She lifted her face. Dirt and sweat staining her cheeks. Her lips cracked. Her voice almost a whisper. Please just make it quick. She expected the shot of a pistol. She expected the end, but instead silence fell. The horse stopped. The man dismounted and he froze. Gideon Hale had seen death before. He had once worn a badge a lawman feared and respected across the frontier. But that life had ended long ago after the night his wife and child were murdered in revenge for a case he could not close. He had buried his badge with them. He had sworn never to take up arms in the name of justice again. Now he lived in solitude on his ranch, far from the blood and the law. Yet here, lying in the dust at his gates, was a young woman begging for death. Her wrists bound, her body broken, her soul shattered. For the first time in years, Gideon felt his hands tremble, not from fear, from fury. He threw down his gun. He dropped to his knees beside her. With one swift cut of his knife, he sliced the rope that bit into her wrists. He pulled the red scarf from his neck and pressed it against her bleeding hip. He lifted her gently into his arms, her head falling limp against his chest. She had begged him to kill her quickly, him too. But Gideon Hale knew there was nothing quick about what had been done to her. This was no crime, a chance. This was betrayal, cruelty, and the darkest form of slavery. And he could not look away. The rancher stood frozen at his own threshold, holding the broken girl who had just shattered the silence of his exile. He had sworn never to fight again, but could he still turn his back now? What secret could drive a young woman to beg for death? And how would this moment change Gideon's life forever? The smell of dust and horse sweat filled the air as Gideon carried Mara into his ranch. Her head rested against his chest, light as a feather, yet heavy with the weight of sorrow. He laid her gently on a bench near the water trough, fetched a tin cup, and filled it. Her lips trembled when the cool water touched them. She drank like someone who had crossed the desert. Each swallow brought a little color back into her pale face, but the tears in her eyes told him the wounds inside ran far deeper than the ones he could see. For a long while, Gideon said nothing. He had lived in silence for years, and silence was easier than words. But when she finally spoke, her voice was broken glass. "My own kin sold me." The words slipped out as if they weighed more than the water she'd just swallowed. "My sister's husband promised me honest work, and she believed him. She believed every lie. They handed me over to a man who buys and sells women like mules. Gideon tightened his jaw. The red scarf that had stopped her bleeding now hung heavy in his hands. He had seen cruelty before, but betrayal by family cut deeper than any outlaw's knife. Mara tried to rise, but pain dragged her back down. Her torn shirt clung to her skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hide. "It is not just the beating," she whispered. "It is knowing I was nothing more than a coin in their pocket." Even my own sister turned her face away. Gideon knelt so his weathered eyes met hers. "You are not nothing," he said, voice steady but soft. "You made it here, didn't you? You fought to live when others wanted you gone." For the first time, a spark lit in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something close. She had been treated like property. But in Gideon's ranch, she was being treated like a person again. He stood and walked to a cupboard in the corner of the barn. From inside, he pulled out a clean shirt, plain cotton, worn from years of use. He set it down beside her without a word. She looked at it, then at him, and for a brief moment, her lips quivered as if to thank him. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of coyotes. The land was wide and empty, but the danger around her was not gone. Mara knew Silas Crow would not give up easily. And Gideon knew the man who had once sworn never to fight again might soon be forced back into the shadows he had tried to escape, because if Silas wanted her back, he would come for her. The only question was how soon. The night settled heavy over the ranch. The crickets sang, the coyotes kept howling, and in the dim lantern light, Gideon sat at his old wooden table across from him. Mara tried to eat the bread he had set out, though each bite seemed to remind her of the ACH in her chest. For years, Gideon had lived alone, speaking only to his horse and the wind, but now across the table sat a girl who carried more pain than anyone her age should bear. And the silence between them was no longer comforting. It was pressing, asking for words neither of them wanted to say. Finally, Gideon broke it. "I know the man who has you." Mara's hand froze midair. "Silas Crow. He has been buying and selling flesh since before you were born. And once I tried to stop him." He leaned back, his eyes shadowed by the lantern glow. "I was a lawman back then. I wore a badge. I believed justice could beat men like him, but I failed. I lost my family because of that failure. Since then, I promised myself I would never fight again." Mara looked at him, her eyes sharp, even through the exhaustion. "So, you will turn me away, too?" Her voice cracked, but her stare was steady. Gideon did not answer right away. He stared at the badge he had had hidden in the drawer for more than a decade. The metal caught a glimmer of the lantern flame. He closed his fist around it. "No, I will not turn you away. But if we are to stand against Silas, we cannot do it with guns alone. We need proof. We need the law on our side." He laid out the plan slowly with the patience of a man who had hunted criminals before. The doctor in town would record her wounds as evidence. The ropes and torn clothing would be kept, and Gideon would send a secret wire to an old marshal he still trusted. But the bait was what made Maya's eyes widen. "We will not chase Silas. We will make him come to us. I will offer him something he cannot resist. A trade of horses too rare to ignore." Mara leaned back, her breath unsteady. For the first time, she saw not just a rancher, but the long and giddy Hale had once been. A man who had tried to bury his past, but could not bury the fire in his chest. The night grew still around them. Two broken souls sat together in the glow of one lantern. And for the first time, they shared a common purpose. "Now tell me, if you were in Mara's place, would you trust this man with your life? Take a sip of your tea, settle in, and let this story keep you company. Tell me what time it is where you are and where you are listening from. And if you want to ride along with me through more stories like this, consider subscribing." The next evening, The ranch was too quiet. The horses shifted in their stalls, uneasy as if they sensed what was coming. Mara stood by the barn door, her hands gripping the wooden frame, her heart racing faster than she wanted to admit. Gideon had prepared everything. The rare horses were tied near the corral, their sleek coats shining under the moonlight. A lantern swung from the gate, its glow soft but steady, the perfect signal for those waiting in the dark. Out beyond the fence, hidden in the brush, the marshals lay in silence, watching. Mara's stomach twisted when she saw shadows moving at the far edge of the pasture. Men on horseback riding hard. At their front was Silas Crow, his face sharp and cruel even in the half-light. Beside him rode Caleb, her brother-in-law, the man she once trusted to protect her, and behind them her sister Eliza, clutching a shawl to her chest, eyes wide with fear, yet still trailing after her husband. The riders pulled up at the ranch gate. Silas dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "Where is she?" he barked. His voice carried the weight of command used to own in lives. Caleb stepped forward, holding a paper high. "Contract," he shouted. "She belongs to us." Mara's blood boiled. She wanted to scream that she was no man's property. But Gideon lifted a hand steady as stone, telling her to wait. He walked forward slowly, his old badge hidden in his pocket, his hat pulled low. "You come to my land," he said, voice calm. "You bring lies and you bring chains, but tonight you walk into a trap of your own making." Silas snarled and reached for his gun. In that instant, Mara pulled the rope loose from the corral gate. The horses burst free, hooves pounding, dirt flying into the night. Chaos ripped through Silas's men as the animals thundered past. Gunfire cracked. One bullet tore through Gideon's sleeve. Another sparked off the iron gate. Mara ducked low, heart hammering in her ears. From the darkness, the marshals surged in, rifles raised, voices shouting for surrender. Silas cursed, firing wildly, but his men faltered under the sudden rush. Caleb tried to pull Eliza back, but she cried out, torn between fear and the truth that was finally staring her in the face. In the smoke and dust, Gideon stood tall, pistol steady, eyes locked on the man who had haunted his past. This was no longer just about Mara. It was about every life Silas had stolen. Every soul sold like cattle. The night was far from over. And the question now was simple. Would Gideon's return to justice end in victory or in blood? The gunfire faded, leaving only the sound of horses in the distance and the sharp crackle of lanterns swaying in the night. Silas Crow lay face down in the dirt, his wrists bound tight by iron shackles. The marshals had him. There would be no escape this time. Caleb was dragged forward too, his mouth running with excuses, but no one cared to listen anymore. Eliza stood frozen, her eyes wide as the truth finally sank in. She had believed in her husband's lies for too long, and now she saw the cost of her silence. She turned to Mara, trembling, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Forgive me." Mara's throat tightened. The pain of betrayal still burned, but she saw the broken woman standing before her and knew anger would not heal what had been done. She gave a small nod. "I will not carry hate, but I will not let you chain me again either." The marshals loaded Silas and Caleb onto their horses, ready to carry them to face the justice they had evaded for too long. For Gideon, watching those men bound and helpless, something inside finally shifted. He felt the weight of the past lift, just enough to breathe again. He had not run this time. He had stood, and he had chosen to protect. As dawn spread over the wide prairie, Mara stood beside Gideon at the edge of the ranch. The sunlight washed her bruised face in gold, and for the first time in days, she looked more alive than broken. "You saved me," she said. "No," Gideon answered, his voice quiet. "You saved yourself. I just refused to look away." In that moment, Mara knew her life was not over. It was beginning again. And Gideon, a man who had buried his badge long ago, Realize that sometimes justice is not about wearing the star on your chest, but about choosing to do what is right, even when no one is watching. So, what can we take from this story? Maybe it is this: betrayal can cut deep, but it does not have to define who we become. We are more than the pain left by others. And even after years of silence, a man can find his courage again. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Mara's shoes, would you be able to forgive your sister? And if you were Gideon, could you risk your peace to protect someone who needed you? If you felt something in this story, give this video a like. It really helps. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe. Settle back with your tea, enjoy the quiet, and tell me what time is it where you are and where are you listening.